Before we start, we want to tell you that in this episode, we will be discussing topics related to suicide, including personal experiences and mental health challenges. Now, this content may be distressing or triggering for some listeners. So, if you or someone you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts, we encourage you to seek immediate help from a mental health professional or contact a crisis hotline like Blackline, which provides space for support and counseling to queer people. The number is 1 800 604 5841. Blackline is a resource divested from the police. If you choose to proceed with this episode, please take care of yourself and listen at your own discretion, but we will provide a trigger warning.
The opinions expressed by guests on Town Hall, a Black Queer podcast, are solely their own and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the podcast host, Bob the Drag Queen and Peppermint, the podcast production team, or the organization Black Queer Town Hall. Each participant is chosen for their unique perspective relevant to the theme of their featured episode. While we strive to provide a platform for diverse voices and narratives, individual opinions may vary, and listeners are encouraged to engage critically and respectfully with the content and the people presented. Welcome back to the podcast, Bad Built Bleach Blonde Butch Body. Have you heard about have you heard about Bleach Blonde Bad Built Butch Body?
Was that Congresswoman Representative
Senator Crockett.
Yeah, she's senator?
Jasmine
Crockett.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah,
Jasmine Crockett.
I'm pretty sure Jasmine Crockett's a senator, right?
She's
a senator, right?
Yeah. Listen, I got some thoughts about it.
Well, I would say no one's watching Drake versus Kendrick anymore. Now they're watching Marjorie Taylor Greene.
And we're a little late on this. Like it was a while ago, but yeah, we're first back, and it's definitely, she always comes with some of the best quips and some of the best drags and some of the best reads, and the best clapbacks for sure. And it was giving a little bit latent transphobia, if I'm being realistic, because it's attacking her for basically having a manly body. That's the insinuation, or that's at least what can be derived from that.
You're not wrong about that.
So I think that sucks, because I don't want anyone to turn around and say that a Black woman has a manly body, because I think that that's inherently transphobic. And so I do think that there's some latent transphobia in there. However, the way that it was delivered was masterful for sure. And
Truly.
I just can't believe. Anyway, yeah. Look, 10 years ago, the only place you could go to find members of a legislature fighting and screaming and insulting people's bodies and damn near standing up was if you went on YouTube and looked at other countries. Oh my gosh, what's going on in Indonesia? Did you hear about the brawl that they had in their parliament or whatever? There's that one video that's like literally chairs are flying in parliament. And they even get kind of wild in the British parliament. And I'd never seen that. I'm sure like 1776, like it was quite kind of wild up in there.
Well, I think that a certain bleach blonde
bad
politician with messy hair, who with orange complected, really reintroduced absurd attacks reintroduced it into politics, and now a lot of people feel quite emboldened to make such remarks. With that being said, let's welcome everyone back to Town
Hall. Yes. Hello. Hi, and welcome back to Town Hall, a Black Queer podcast, the podcast where we journey through a theme by sharing stories, music, poetry, and art of varying depth and hilarity. And today's episode is titled Truth and Consequences. And we are diving into a topic that hits very, very, very close to home for many of us. Definitely Bob and myself, and seems to sort of it's very relevant right now, but it also kind of reincarnates itself at least in my life, and I'm sure it does in Bob's as well. And I know that it does in the world of Black public facing figures and activism. And so, yeah.
And that's right. Now, this episode, we're exploring the ramifications, punishments, and consequences that Black queer people often face when we are honest about our experiences in the workplace, at home, and in society at large, which is practically every aspect of our
Yeah, the
lives.
only place is like maybe in the bathroom we left off.
Yeah,
Um,
literally. But then that even.
oftentimes being truthful about who we are and what we go through can be empowering. And I certainly think it's necessary, but it can also bring about challenges and backlashes, especially when it goes to speaking truth to power. And so today we are unpacking those stories and looking at the impact of living authentically in a world that isn't always as accepting.
We're going to hear from folks who have faced discrimination at work, strained relationships at home, and societal pushback just for speaking their truth. Their stories are powerful and shed light on the resilience of our community. And one that really sticks out in my head, this is a pretty big moment in a very recent moment in Black pop culture, was Amanda Seales talking to Shannon Sharp on Club Shay Shay. It was so interesting to me how when Amanda Seales was just talking about her experience, just being like, "Hey, I was on Disney Channel, and some of the kids were calling me the N word," and Shannon Sharp was like, "They're not racist." And Amanda Seales was like, the only thing you know
Is
about
that they
these
called the
people,
N word?
the only thing you know about them is that they called me the N word and they're white. And you know a lot about me, and what you do is you immediately defend
Over
them
me. Yeah.
over me. And the only thing you know about them is that they are children, they're white, and they call me the N word. That's literally, or I don't even know if they're white, but they're children and they call me the N word. That's literally all you know. That's
And
wild.
I mean, it played into the larger kind of narrative and conversation that, Lene Vinny had a really, really beautiful sort of take on the whole situation. Where Amanda, initially this was around the same time, but slightly before her, she went on Club Shay Shay, had spoken about, Amanda's been very outspoken about Palestine and, wanting to use her platform to tell these stories and highlight a lot of these stories. And I think in as not as only a direct result of that, but just in general, she's been seen as as polarizing. And so when went online and said that she was, just sort of accounting or recounting that she had not been invited into many professional spaces, that at certain times supported and uplifted, and, events that she'd hosted, award shows and different things like that, that are sort of seen as industry for Black industry. And that she hadn't been sort of welcomed into these spaces by the Black community. She faced a lot of backlash there. And there was people writing op-eds, and the Griot had a really a piece that I would say would come off as hurtful. Essence did a whole like serious op-ed, saying, "Oh, when it's more important to be liked than be good," or something like that. And it just felt really snarky and dragging this Black woman. I mean, she is a Black woman, and she is using her platform. And I wonder if people, I just think it's really harmful, because when you're shutting down Black dissent, you are shutting down Black dissent, you know?
Well, especially when it's a Black woman who is being particularly outspoken, you're sending a message that like
That's what I
you
mean.
Black
Yeah,
bitches need to shut the
that's
fuck up.
more what I meant.
And if you Black bitches can't act right, act like the nice kind Black ladies, then we're not going to let you into our parties, into our spaces, and we're not going to give you respect, and we will drag you in every Black article, magazine,
The
we
whole
will make
Black
it known.
everything, Black magazines, Black TV, Black social media, Black Twitter, Black this, are gonna come after your ass. It's giving, you need to subscribe to the Black version of respectability politics, you know?
Which I mean, I've been having conversations with my friends and my family about respectability of politics and how they will not. We're not going to get what
We
we
don't.
want
We don't.
by acting like we deserve by acting like we deserve what we should have been done got already. You know what I mean? If that makes any
Say it
sense at
one more
all.
time.
You're not going to get what you want by acting like you're supposed to deserve what you should already have, what should be rightfully be yours. So you don't get rights by acting respectable. If you act like you deserve rights, that's not going to make you get
I don't
rights any
think it's
faster.
I don't disagree. I think you're 100% right. I do think that it takes different things at different times because there's different people in different mindsets. I mean, we're talking about people and relationships here ultimately. And so I do think that it takes different people at different times. I don't think that the only way to get everything that we need, especially since ultimately what we want when it comes to rights and you know and inclusion is a way to be able to join the rest of the people who already have the rights that we're looking for. And so if that's part of it, then there is a sense that, I mean, we're sharing this planet, we're sharing this country or this land, this city, this industry, this space. We have to share the space. If we're fighting for rights, that means we're speaking to people who are denying us our rights, and that we have to eventually share the space with those same people. And if that's true, then we do have to find common ground in some way, shape, or form at some point later on, whatever. But I do, so I do think that not respectability politics, but being able to relate to people in some way, whether that means they better understand us and that they see our humanity, vice versa, or we find common ground together that's in a different space, whatever, that is important to be able to hold at some point. But certainly the disruptive nature of activism and speaking truth to power is what is going to get their attention, and then what is going to get other people hopefully on board. But I do think, I mean, I remember watching A Different World where Cree Summers' character was, in the first season, Cree Summers' character was like the hippie who was like, natural and all this stuff. And she was very much like, let's protest, very quick to protest. And that was her character. And then in the later years of the show, like all the people who had been college students eventually like worked at the school. And then they brought in a new group of people. So they brought in Jada Pinkett Smith to not take the place of, but fill in that same spot as, she was like more like Black Power, but very much an activist. Jada Pinkett Smith was, and so there was a scene where she confronted all of the old heads, basically, who were in the first season, as like being boomers. Basically, y'all are just boomers. Y'all are just y'all are just part of the problem and part of the system. Y'all ain't gonna help make no change. Let's go out and fight. And she obviously had a point, but Cree Summers' character came back. And Cree used to be like, had this like curly hair and wearing, hippie clothes and tie-dye clothes and all this stuff. And now she was in a suit with glasses. And she said, well, now I'm an attorney. And who the hell do you think is going to bail your ass out when you're, marching, And so it kind of takes both.
I see that. What it sounds like you're saying is there's obviously a certain amount of simulation that you have to do to assimilate, to be in a society with others. But of course, I'm referring to things like, for example, there are some people in my family who really, really, really do not like the idea of Black women in bonnets in public. It is in the Black community, baby, this is a conversation. There are certain people who are of a certain generation who are like, it's not appropriate. It is just not appropriate, which is crazy because I remember those exact same
wearing
women
bonnets in public
with rollers,
maybe not a bonnet,
with
but rollers.
I don't know if y'all remember this or not, but there was a period in time where not just Black women, by the way, a lot of women, like if you are roll setting your hair, it takes a while.
It takes all day.
You have to put it on. You have to hang out with it on.
Everybody who wears rollers,
they were like, well, I still got stuff to do.
Takes all day.
Yeah, I still have stuff to do. So you put the rollers in, and then you still go grocery shopping.
White women do it. White old ladies do it. People coming from anybody coming from the salon does it. White girls have been in rollers too. and we see white old ladies live in their rollers, and then if they're going to the grocery store, they tie something around it. It's basically a bonnet.
Yeah. Yeah. But because I think because the bonnet is specifically so black, it's received
Yeah.
differently. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's bring it back to Jasmine Crockett, because when she was attacked by Marjorie Taylor Greene first. Let's be real. Let's be the truth about her
Yeah.
eyelashes. And people came in to AOC came in to defend her. Some of the guys didn't seem to understand what was going on. It kind of relegated it to feeling like a cat fight, because these guys were like, whoa, slow, or too obtuse to understand what was happening.
That guy
He
knew
knew what she was
that
saying,
guy knew
what Jasmine was
what
saying.
Jasmine Crockett
Exactly.
was saying. I don't
He's
know
like, I
what
don't
that
know,
means. I'm like,
whatever.
girl,
But the
okay.
point is, when
But you understood the eyelashes coming.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And had nothing to say. And so then when Jasmine came back, and then when they were sort of playing out, and they were like the after effects of that, people were jumping on Jasmine and telling her, calm down, calm down. You need to calm down. Like she was suddenly some black woman who had some like sudden explosion, emotional outburst, who had like randomly, spontaneously combusted, not even acknowledging the fact that she was attacked. And personally,
It's a response.
you know, and was responding to an attack. And
Yeah.
so that just goes to show like the consequences for Jasmine's actions in the same regard. When she was asking a question, and I guess she got the answer, because she basically said, so if I say this, so and such to so and so, what would happen? And
She didn't even say her
she didn't even
name. She didn't
say
even say who
anybody's name.
they all knew who
We
she's
all
talking
knew.
about.
They
They
knew.
knew though.
And suddenly she needs to calm down. She's being too outrageous and all this stuff. And I just think that just goes to show. And it'll be interesting to see. I mean, she is very outspoken. She definitely is a person who has them clapbacks. So it'll be interesting to see in the vein of, under the guise of like protecting decorum and keeping the black women who are in these legislative sessions to be quiet and meek and only speak when they're spoken to, in the interest of decorum. Is she going to face any pushback? Maybe not in direct response to this moment, because I feel like it kind of came and went. But I think that like she's definitely on their list of like, oh, we're going to get her. You know what I mean? That's what it seems like.
Well, if she does get pushback, MTG
She
needs to
won't.
get some
She won't.
too,
She never
because
has. She never has.
as they say, what's good for the
Goose.
goose is good for the gander. Um, and if it's okay for one group, then it has to be okay for the other group as well. That's such a great saying. What's good for the goose is good for the gander is such a deliciously. It has good. It's got so much alliteration. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. It's like it's so it rolls off the tongue so magnificently. I feel wise when I say it. I feel sage like.
um,
You know.
it is definitely an old school saying, and I say it all the time. And so, we want to. This episode was inspired because of so much that's happening right now, and we see that as public figures, we often have an opportunity. Sometimes a self-imposed responsibility, to use our platforms for the greater good, to speak out on issues that we see as affecting our community or the world or people in general, or people that aren't even a part of our community directly. And the sort of the how we have to navigate that, because oftentimes, and while there are certain situations where, regardless of who you are, if you speak out on one side of the argument or another, you could see pushback, repercussion, financial consequences, and things like that, for sure. As Black folks, I see oftentimes we are a lot of times, and let's just be very real here, like in terms of like institutional um sort of prowess and security, Black folks aren't often the group that are most um, ingratiated. We don't always have them. We aren't the highest earners statistically in our own fields. And
Yeah.
maybe sports might be one exception to that rule. But in general, across the board, in many industries, if there's Black people, we're not only a minority in the country, we're a minority in that industry usually, and we are certainly um, on the lower end of earning less in general, and then also earning less receiving less raises and less benefits as a result of those things. And oftentimes when it comes to speaking politically are the first to lose that platform and lose it permanently and lose it in a different way. Marjorie Taylor Greene and almost said Jasmine Sullivan Crockett, may both be reprimanded. They both may be spoken to, but the person who's going to be branded for the longer amount of time as the outspoken person who's out of control would be Jasmine Crockett. Even though Marjorie Taylor Greene,
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever heard her speak about legislation ever. She's always talking about somebody's personal body, something, space lasers, whatever she's doing. She's always going off on some tangent. And I rarely hear her being held to account in the same way that we see other people held to account, someone like Jasmine Crockett. And so that is kind of
Also, as someone from Georgia, we got to do better than Marjorie Taylor Greene. This is wild. Like Georgia, come on, y'all. Like Georgia, I'm from Georgia. I don't want that person being representative of the values that Georgia holds true to their hearts. I mean, I just feel like there was a period of time where even Republican politicians had much more decorum than they do today.
But it's a lot easier now because it's when the decorum goes out the window, then it can become ad hominem, personal attacks. We can talk about somebody's lashes or somebody's body and not about what they're saying about the legislation, not talking about how their constituents are affected by a lot of the things that they usher in, usually because of the dark money that's flowing through politics. And they are basically paid to do the things that are in direct opposition to what is in the best interest of their constituents. If there's if there's a shooting, we're sure to hear the politicians saying, guns are great, there's nothing wrong with guns. I'm not saying that the Second Amendment isn't something that we need to cherish and uphold, but like we need to actually speak about certain issues. If we're suddenly, because it's like if there's poison, if people are dying because the candy is poisoned and people want to stop the poison candy, sure you already know there's going to be, most of the politicians are going to vote to put more poison in the candy because it's not the candy that's killing us, it's mental illness or whatever. Like they blame it on something else.
Poison doesn't kill people. People who buy poison kills people.
And they won't prosecute. They won't prosecute.
Oh, they'll prostitute. Oh no, what they're doing over the way they sell themselves for a little bit of for a few constituents, for a little bit of power, baby. The highest paid prostitutes in the land are ones sitting in Congress, are the ones sitting in the Oval Office. Biden is the highest paid prostitute in America.
So
on that note, let's dive into our topic today. So our first guest, Gene, is a Black and non-binary human originally from the Lower Haight district of San Francisco, currently residing in Brooklyn.
Stop.
And they share with us the ramifications.
You have to. It's definitely pronounced Haight. You have to. It's like a legendary district.
You have to say it right. Me. Wow.
I'm sorry.
No, keep this in there. Keep this in there. Let you all know that Pep drags me. Some of us went to public school in Atlanta.
You never heard of Haight-Ashbury?
No kidding. No, never, not once. I don't hate Asbury. Asbury's nice. Why would I hate it?
Okay, go ahead.
Why would I hate Asbury Park?
It's not like Asbury Park. Okay, all right, go ahead.
No, I'm just kidding. I've never heard of this place, but I'm trying to do my best. Here we go. Our first guest, Gene, is a Black and non-binary human from the Lower Haight district of San Francisco, currently residing in Brooklyn. They share with us the ramifications of political protest as a Black queer individual.
My name is Gene Gragg. I am born and raised in San Francisco, California. I am an Aries. Lived a few other places, lived in Seattle during lockdown, and now I'm currently residing in New York City, specifically Brooklyn. My wallet misses Seattle, but my heart is in love with Brooklyn. What was it like growing up for me in San Francisco? I would say younger years, like elementary and pre-K and all that shit. Very diverse, super hippie, like hippie down boots. Just like nudist runs in the Bay Area, plus just like people smoking weed before it was like legalized and that not being a big issue with the police. And, not a lot of gentrification, a lot of black owned businesses, specifically in the neighborhood where I grew up, which is like the Lower Haight. Um, and I think a lot of community minded folks, just like a lot of different levels of accountability within the community. So if I'm outside and acting a fool with my cousins, our neighbors are definitely telling our parents what we did and when, and kind of like ratting us out. I feel like that was early days SF. So when did I know I was queer and what was that experience like? I feel like I knew in second grade. I was like, these boys are cute and I want to chase them. I want to knock down their blocks that they're building and make them chase me. A dangerous game of flirtation. Yeah, so I definitely knew in second grade. As far as me realizing maybe this was very different than like what other kids were experiencing and them kind of being praised or prepped for it, like prepped for dating girls. I was not having those conversations. Like I knew at a young age, like elementary school, like being anywhere near like effeminate, liking, boys, whatever, that's, was outside of like that straight spectrum. I knew that was bad. So growing up, I just had to keep a lot of that to myself. I feel like around middle school is when it felt more do or die versus like elementary. It was like, okay, like you're a young kid, whatever, you live your life. But I feel like middle school is when social circles started to like change and I got to see some of like the verbal violent attacks on queer people, trans folks, for just like going outside of that cisgendered hetero kind of spectrum or lack lack of words like that fencing, or those boundaries. And then high school is when I would say that verbal violence amplified to possible physical violence for some of my other classmates. But funny enough, when I was 16 is when I came out to my mom. And that was a really fast conversation. I got to see her kind of like put the like connect the dots together. And she was like kind of speaking of some things out loud of like when I was younger and like the people that I'm hanging around with in high school. And she was like, okay, this all makes sense. But luckily my mom was a like pre-K teacher. So this whole idea of like be who you are, be the strongest version of yourself was always implemented into me when I was a kid. So that coming out conversation was not tricky, but I would say coming out to like cousins and my sisters was a little bit rocky, never bad or violent, but just more so like took a bit more confidence from me. And then once I got that solidified, people that I like worked with or like was acquaintances with were like, you seem really lighter. You seem really, really happier. And that was a result of me like shedding that truth, I guess. What holds weight for me in the question around truth and consequences? Ooh, I think what holds weight maybe is like on my psyche. I'm thinking of like a lot of memories where I spoke truth and there were consequences, or where I've witnessed other people be brave enough to speak truth and witness some consequences. Sometimes the consequences are verbal, physical, and sometimes the consequences are silent, like straight up ghost reply. So I think of a lot of things from all ages, kind of like that moment right before death, where all these memories, I guess, play in your head. That's kind of what's immediately hitting my head. But really thinking about some experiences in college. One experience I would say that really stands out in college is when I was in my alma mater, CSU Channel Islands. For those that don't know it, it is basically the equivalent of like San Francisco to Sacramento. I would say because it was in Camarillo, Camarillo is kind of like the Sacramento of SoCal. So just surrounded by like farms, similar to like, UC Davis area, really disconnected from the world. The campus used to be a mental institution, like asylum. So yes. And so we are far away from the city center. And that is because they wanted about 4 miles between the vicinity and the town to then catch anyone that might have escaped, which is why there's like no other infrastructure. It is literally like a few main roads and then like uh cabbages, vegetables, all that. Um so with that being said, it was isolated, just so you get an idea of that. And on top of that, we were in a predominantly like white conservative area. A lot of people think there aren't red areas in California. They think California is all blue, democratic, whatever. No, 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 no. Those rich people are rich for a reason. They're close friends, have very different politics than maybe what some might want to share publicly. But the tea is revealed. You can read the tea leaves when you get to that campus. It is very apparent. And so with that comes a certain demographic racially. With that comes a lot of like white folks, a lot of white folks from money, and a lot of white folks affiliated with conservatives that have money. So therefore, it is in their best interest to be conservative, no matter how Disneyfied they are. Like no matter how deep in the trenches of Disney they are still very conservative. So that's just like the background of the student population, and that also mirrors some of the staff that was there, and some of the professors. So essentially, me and a few students that were black and brown started noticing a lot of like racial attacks on campus by students, even through professors, and then like no acknowledgement from the staff that are getting like hundreds of thousands of dollars and their housing paid for and cars through student tuition. And so we were like, where is the accountability on their side? Like we as students face immediate accountability if we don't have our shit together for financial aid. If we are failing a class, we have to like repeat it in order to graduate. Like our systems of balance are there, but it just seemed like there were none, from students to faculty, but from faculty to students, it was very strong. So a few students, and I came up with the Student Corrective Action Network called SCAN on the CSU Channel Islands campus, where we gave a speech to the provost and vice president about how we wanted to have more accountability. We raised some alarming concerns, like some students were sleeping on campus and were homeless because they couldn't afford housing, but there were also empty dorm rooms that like no one was claiming. And I'm like, why aren't y'all giving this away? And so we weren't really getting their attention through email, trying to like ambush them like guerrilla tactics in person. And so we're like, where are a lot of donors going to be located? Where are a lot of folks from like our alma mater going to be located? Where are the grad students at? And so it's kind of like this dog and pony show for the school that we crashed and gave a speech to. And then from there, we started to see change be implemented, of course, because it was very public. And a lot of murmurs from other students kind of feeling more empowered, grew SCAN a little bit more right before graduation. And what was, I guess, kind of nerve wracking with that version of truth is the consequences there of being labeled radical, rebellious, by other black and brown students, not just white folks. Some faculty that completely agreed with us, kind of coaching us in the shadows down the catacombs because they knew that they could maybe get fired or face some type of retaliation, just by speaking the truth and fighting for like students' voices. And so in that realm, it was very scary because the consequences could impact your graduation, your degree, and you don't graduate or are expelled for whatever loophole reason, then not only do you not have your degree, you also have all these student loans and you have like expulsion on your record. So how are you going to get a degree from another school? So it was a lot of that. But luckily we were just kind of made into social pariahs. And I feel like that's like a low stakes consequence rather than like not having your degree, which would block you from your future. And it was by students that we didn't care to be close with anyway. And the whole point that we were thinking was like, you know what, by speaking this truth, holding these powerful people accountable, we are going to make it hopefully easier for the next batch of students to come in and say what they want and deal with a lot less fear and ambiguity and kind of give them the groundwork to then carry on the torch. There was no severe negative consequences from that experience, but there was a moment where a lot of the participants in SCAN were hearing murmurs from other groups on our college campus that were like either Latinx ran or Black ran, and they were feeling more so left out. And so that's where like that social pariah comes in. And I would say, for lack of better words, like there were social consequences in terms of like not being further connected in the student body. But at the same damn time, we did this with like no resources from the school. Y'all got money from the school. Y'all are already like an approved group on campus. Y'all already have ties to a sponsor on campus. Y'all could have been did this, but like that bravery wasn't there. So I would just say like us getting labeled as like radicals, like Malcolm X vibe, which like if that's the price for freedom and a path forward, then goddamn it, run the ticket, like whatever. But it was just those like little social consequences. No one was expelled or reprimanded, thank God. I think, and that's partly due to like all the eyes that we had on us from faculty and just being really close with like our Title IX officer as well, who's making sure we kind of knew how to navigate any retaliation. And so I think it was just very clear that we were taking steps that were premeditated and kind of like calculated. And so therefore people were on their best behavior as far as faculty. But the student population, in some cases, felt excluded and needed to get some grievances out, I guess, due to the visibility that we got and how much conversation it sparked. But at the same time, it's not like we were gatekeeping access to it. So people feel what they feel. How do I feel now about truth and consequences compared to today's climate, political climate, specifically with speaking out about Palestine? It is feeling scary, is what I will say, because I am seeing consequences to people speaking their truth in terms of being pro-Palestine, anti-Israel establishment. Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing people get fired online, specifically like celebrities losing endorsements or brands or collaborations. Learning about a lot of powerful people in Marvel are like Zionists. And I have no idea what that means for like actors that kind of see Marvel as like the perfect kind of like cash grab or opportunity for like other films and cinema inclusion. But me in particular, in terms of like my future work, I feel comfortable sharing what I know on like my Instagram, also like my Twitter. But in terms of like being out there in the public sphere, going like up on a podium or like giving a speech to the public, shit is wild. Like people are getting hit by 2x4s and getting like rushed to the ground. I just saw a video the other day on Twitter of a cop throwing a pro-Palestinian protester on the floor and then punching him in the back of the head. So yeah, it's an American cop in, I believe it was in UCLA or New York. It was one of those areas, which I feel like are the two hottest areas right now. Is like LA and New York with these protests. Um, yeah, I'm feeling like we're seeing the true state of where our democracy is, and we're seeing the true state of what is believed to be our role in the grand scheme of politics. Like, no, 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 you're supposed to get involved to a certain point. Like you can protest with a sign on your window, perhaps. Even then, you could still be targeted. Like it's very like we need you to be polite and not disruptive. And it's like, okay, what change comes with that? Like, does change ever come with that? Um, so yeah, it's really scary, but I think there's a path forward. I think there's a lot of paths forward. In particular, I'm noticing how much these companies want people to get back to work, back to the office. There's a lot of power in disrupting the day to day, like traffic blocks. And I think in particular, there's a lot of power in disrupting these strongholds that people have with these like properties, like disrupting these buildings and people's access to them, disrupting like downtown areas. That tourist industry is really, really such a big money grab for a lot of these cities, and disrupting that is what gets people to pay attention, disrupting money. So I'm feeling good in terms of what is possible, but I am worried about the consequences that come with that because they seem to be very severe, especially with these like Zionist vigilantes running around and smacking people upside the head with like planks of wood and doing jump kicks to people that are just like protesting, students that are protesting and want their universities to divest from funding a genocide, funding missiles. Like, I don't think your textbook dollars should equate to a fucking missile on a family of four minding their business. So it's just a lot. And I mean, we're even seeing it with like Boeing whistleblowers suddenly getting killed or dying randomly. It's it's really, really an intense time. The democracy is on the ground. We are all screaming fight back, and they they just aren't getting them hits in. Backtracking the coming out. Growing up in a really chill environment, was there anyone I was afraid of coming out to when I was younger? I would say I was really nervous with my mom because I'm like, this is like my housing, my support system, single parent household. So I was nervous about that, but I felt like there was a path forward because I'm like, you know, I'm a I'm gonna find out if she just preaching or if she also walking the walk and the experiment is my life, my well-being. So that one I felt very nervous about. In terms of my cousins, I would say I was nervous with them too, I guess in terms of, what will there be a difference of treatment? I never felt like, oh, this person might try to punch me, stab me, spit on me, whatever, or like, oh, I'm gonna run and tell that to so and so. I never felt worried about that. I think what I was thinking about at the time was a difference of like, oh, my bad. I didn't mean to call this thing gay, but since you're in the room, let me apologize. You know what I mean? Like, I like shit like that. Like, I was like, okay, like, will there be a difference of how people act? And in some cases there was, but all for the positive. For example, that example I just gave, like calling things gay, like meaning bad. When I came out to my older sister, she was like, like, why didn't you ever tell me? And I'm like, girl, you constantly calling shit gay to me bad. Why the fuck would I ever come out to you? And she had to sit for a moment and really think about that and was like, oh, wow, I had no idea how something that could be so casual to me could make you that much more nervous. And all I want to do is like hold you and let you know like you're in a safe space. So I do want to work on that. And she has. She's like been my like strongest pillar. One of my oldest sisters, Christina, shout out to her, shout out to all the Aquariuses out there that are misunderstood. But yeah, I would say probably my mom was when I was most nervous. Cousin semi, and then out of my sisters, I would say my older sisters was probably like the most nerve wracking as well. But just due to those comments growing up, but. once that air was cleared, we were good. We're like more than good. Like they've been like my biggest supporters. What would I say to any black or brown bodied person struggling to speak truth to their like sexuality and personhood in the foreground or in the background with all the consequences? Um, I think first things first is making sure you like yourself. You need to have a conversation with yourself. Decide on what it is that you like truly love and value about yourself. And also know that like your sexuality is one little fragment of like who you are. Your sexuality, for some weird fucking reason, because people can't mind their fucking business, is everyone else's world, but it is such a small little fragment in your world. Like you have a whole fucking universe of you. It is like one little speck of dust on one planet in your fucking universe. So just keep that in mind. Think about what you fucking love. Through what you love, build out a community, whether that be online or in person. If you are a film buff, figure out some fucking film festivals. If you're a painter, figure out some painting workshops, etc. Or just get a group together and go paint in the park. If you have a few friends, if you have one friend, figure out like your commonalities and really like focus on that. Focus on your joy. Focus on where you feel, I guess, limitless. And let that energy guide you for who you can be safe around, what feels safe, where you can feel recharged. Just make sure like you have that kind of like mitochondria, make sure you got your powerhouse of the cell on lock. And in terms of like coming out and the consequences with it, sometimes that is what it is. There will be consequences, and sometimes it's a lot bigger in your head than the reality, and you won't know until you speak it. So in a lot of ways, you can think and think and think of how the conversation will go, what you'll say, and whatever else. But no matter how much you prepare, you just never know. Like people can surprise you for the better or for the worse, and you just won't know until you experience it. But try to figure out who is more solid than not. Like, for my mom, I was really nervous. Maybe figure out who makes you less nervous to come out to, and maybe make like a checklist of like, okay, I'm going to start with the easiest people first, then go on to the hardest. Or maybe figure out, irregardless of how safe you feel, maybe you just need to move to another area first. Maybe you're in a town that just feels like no matter how many big or how big of a circle you create for yourself, it's the town or the area that you're in where you just can't thrive in or like be your full self, unlock your full potential. And so maybe what it's about is securing that safety first and then coming out to people. Figuring out like where's your safe place first, where's your community at, and then coming out to people. But sometimes there's also like no path forward. Sometimes the closure is no closure. And just be sure to like hold that truth with the other truth as well. Make sure it's like balanced. Like, yes, that you could come out, it could fucking suck. You could also come out and it could be fucking great. But that is the realm of the possibilities in life, is you won't know until you do. But before all of that, just make sure you have a group of people, one person, two, whatever the number is, that will hold you down irregardless. And if you feel like you don't have that, make sure you have something that belongs to you that will hold you down in times of like turbulent emotions, whether that be something creative or exercise, yoga, whatever it may be. Make sure you are good where you are first. Make sure you're good alone first, and then think about the others. Because remember, you're inviting them in. You are not asking for permission. You are already who you are. You are inviting them into your truth. So make sure them bitches take off their shoes before they come in.
Oh, I mean,
Oh my God, Flay.
that's I just, it just, we've had so many different situations. We've had Black presidents. We are seemingly have been included in so many areas, um, industrially. Like a lot of this has to do with job security, like when it comes down to it. Um, and either that or like social acceptance. And a lot of us, we've seen our inclusion in a way, in a much greater way than 30, 40 years ago, perhaps. But what is so discouraging to me is how it feels like we've come 100 miles, but I get the impression when you speak out of turn that we go way back to where it feels like we were. Like it feels like we haven't come that far. Eh, I don't know how I'm not articulating myself.
Well, I mean, I think I understand what you're saying. We've been included in many aspects of life, but not indicative of our population. You know what I mean? So like one black president out of 46 is not indicative of how many black folks are in America. The amount of black people in Congress does not represent the amount of women in Congress does not represent the amount of women in the world. The amount of women in the presidency, sure as
Of
hell,
course,
does not represent
at
the amount of
all.
women in
I
America.
mean, yeah, that not in our
Literally
presidency. Good grief, that'd be zero.
zero.
But I mean,
And we have one woman as a vice president is all we've had in
yeah,
46
but who would have thought
presidencies, you know?
that, like, I mean, what I thought was coming, less than 10 years after Hillary Clinton ran, which was an historic run for the presidency and showed us that it's possible and certainly a lot closer to a woman being a president of the United States. Whether there was the correct woman or not, that's a different conversation. But it showed us that was at least very possible and likely in some regards. Like it felt like it was going to happen. I think there's a lot of people thought that it was going to happen until those wee hours of the morning. In
Yeah, oh
2016.
my
I
God, what a
know,
crazy
honey.
day.
Yeah.
I'll
But I
never
mean,
forget that day.
if you would have told me that it's going to be 5 or 10 more years before another woman gets, or however many more years before a woman gets elected, I would agree to that. But if you told me in 10 years Roe versus Wade is going to be gone, I would have been like, well, damn. Not only did we not get that, we went way back. Do you know what I mean? And
Who who was the woman that ran with
Sarah
John
Palin.
McCain? The Alaska lady? Sarah Palin. I forgot about Sarah Palin. That was a wild.
That was wild too.
Do you remember back when we thought? Do you remember when we thought to ourselves, it can't get wilder than this? Like Sarah Palin was running for vice president with John McCain, and we were like, this is as
Well, that's
crazy as
because
politics gets.
the reason why it was.
And then they showed
Yeah,
us.
well, I think the thing is because I mean the biggest moment for Sarah Palin were her like weird musings and quips, but like the thing that was the most funny was obviously the SNL Tina Fey impersonation. So the thing that was wild was that the impersonations were so easy to do. Like Tina Fey said, I didn't even have to make anything up. I just literally dressed like her and said what she said. And that was like what was wild, but it was still the fact that happened on SNL that like gave us permission to be like, this is outrageous. Well, now they're not even doing that anymore on SNL. They don't even do those because it's just, you just play the video from Congress. Like they don't even do them anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway, good grief. Our next guest, Nate, is an Army veteran turned advocate and real estate professional. And Nate shares with us his experience serving in the military and his very touching story of being discharged under the discriminatory policy, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And a reminder, there is a trigger warning right here.
My name is Nate Alejandro. I am an Army veteran who am now in real estate and property management. I live in Poughkeepsie, New York. I was born and raised in the Hudson Valley. It's about like an hour north of the city. Growing up in the Hudson Valley, I was actually raised in a very conservative religious household. My parents were very involved in the church. So I grew up very sheltered. And not really exposed to much, outside of Christianity. And it was very interesting growing up as a person of color in my town, which was very homogenous, like, and not so much even the town, because where I was born in Beacon at the time did have a high population of Latino people. But in the church that I was in, it was very, a lot of, very white church. And I was one of the only people of color in the church. And that's also where I went to school. So growing up in that sort of little enclave, I was very sheltered. In a way, like I was sort of trying to hide even back then. The fact that I was Christian a lot of times outside of the church scenario, because it was sort of, I think I never really bought into it as a kid. So I kind of was like, this is, a pretend group that we go to on Sundays. And it was sort of not embarrassing, just a little bit like just feeling like on the outside of everything else. And as part of the growing up in a religious, environment, they sort of teach you to be separate from everything else and kind of make you believe that you're kind of have this elitist sort of attitude towards the rest of the world, like our family doesn't do that type of thing. So definitely grew up feeling just, outside of everything. And then, you know, learning that I was gay and not having any words to put towards those feelings, I think was really damaging. I didn't really know how to carry myself. And so, I was very awkward. I feel like I developed late as a gay man because of that. Like, I never really got to have those experiences as, a young adult growing up of having the supportive family and being who I was. So I had to kind of sort of learn after the fact. With everything going on these days, and then, everyone's saying that, LGBT people are grooming children and things like that. I think it's super important, for stories like mine to be told, because if I didn't have that group at that age telling me that I'm okay and that I'm loved and it's okay to love myself, I wouldn't be sitting here today. When I was 15, I ended up moving out of my dad's house and into my brother's house, where he was super supportive. I grew up in an even more rural town, but somehow found more support there. But unfortunately, like, we were poor. My options and my resources were super limited. I went away to a 4-year school, not being okay. I didn't have, I wasn't where I am today in terms of my mental health, my emotional health, maturity. I was not ready for college. And I flunked out after the first year. I was working at the grocery store and just didn't have any options. So I was with my mom at the time, and this is after years of not speaking to my parents. Me and my mother sort of reconnected. She had a change of heart after watching the movie Rent. And then I was living in her house, but I didn't have a car. We were in an area where, like, that's needed. I couldn't afford to even, sign up for community college. We were at a street fair one day and there was a recruiter there, and she's like, well, why don't you join the Army? Like, she sort of meant it, half seriously. So I talked to the guy, and he said, well, if you sign up today and go by next week, we'll give you $20,000. I was like, 19 at the time with no prospects. I was like, yeah, let's go. So I signed up. And I did have a conversation with my family at the time, because I was like, this was during the time of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, where you were not allowed to be openly gay and be in the military. And I was like, well, what about the big pink elephant in the room? So they were like, well, you're just going to have to butch it up a little bit. So I seriously tried. Before that, like, after coming out and before joining the Army, I was so flamboyant, and I used to have, like, these outfits. The hair was always wavy, and if you couldn't figure out I was gay, I was carrying a purse to let you know. So, like, it was one extreme to the exact opposite. Like, I went through my social media, I scrubbed everything out. I put all my fancy clothes in the back of my wardrobe, and I came up with this story that I had this girlfriend back home, and it was one of my friends who she knew I was gay. And, so I basically essentially went back into the closet to join the military. So at first I was very, very just quiet. I was like, let me just keep to myself. Let me try to hide it. And when I do speak, try to butch it up a little bit. But, it quickly became apparent to people that this was, that I was not, straight. So after a while, after basic training, after my technical training, and I got assigned to my unit, I felt, I started to get comfortable. People got to know me. I felt that we were friendly, and I started to act more like myself, and tell less lies without telling the full truth. I'd be very careful about, which pronouns I was using when I'm talking about people, and, when I'm talking about people that I love and things like that. And I would never come right out and say, like, yeah, I'm gay. So then fast forward to me being deployed to Iraq. I was deployed to Iraq in 2009, which was part of the drawdown effort. So that's where we were, reducing the troops and breaking down all the camps and everything like that. Although I was originally in Baghdad, they reassigned me to Al Assad Air Force Base, where I was responsible for the Class 4 yard, which is basically a huge open air Home Depot. They had everything from nuts and bolts to prefab buildings, and I was responsible for inventorying all of it and getting it, helping to get it sent overseas to Kuwait, Afghanistan, things like that. So being part of the admin team, I also would do little morale boosters for the guys that were there. I would coordinate little like cookouts, birthday parties, things like that, just to kind of keep the morale up, because it was really kind of like a crappy detail. At one point, I went out into the yard, which was like, just acres and acres of land and, these Connex containers and sand. I go out to the yard and I wanted to get a birthday card signed for one of the guys. And when I get to them, all of a sudden, like, they just start throwing rocks at me. And at first I'm thinking like, right. So I'm thinking like, they're just being dumb, guys, how guys can get, especially when they're all together acting stupid. So I was trying to like play it cool. And then the rocks started hitting me. And I realized like how hard they were throwing these rocks. And they were hitting me all over. They were hitting me in the face. And so at that point I was like, all right, they're like wailing these rocks at me. And I'm like looking at their faces and I see nothing but like disgust and hate. And I'm just like, didn't even know where this was coming from, because these are some people that they were a part of my original unit, but we had built a rapport, and I was under the impression that we were like friendly acquaintances. At that point, I was like, let me hightail it out of here, because like I truly felt at that point, looking at their faces and feeling how hard they were throwing these rocks, like, if I fight back, I'm going to be in danger. I'm going to be seriously injured or even killed out here, and no one's going to know a thing. They'll just bury me in the sand. So I ran back to the office. And even then I tried to hide it because I didn't want to out myself. So obviously, like, I had bruises and stuff all over my face. So my commanding officer was like, what the hell happened? And I didn't want to say anything. So she runs out there and she starts, trying to figure out what happened. They start mouthing off to her, and it leads to a fight between two of the guys, which led to an investigation, because they started swinging on each other and she was there. So in the investigation, it came out that, that they admitted to throwing the rocks at me. And they said that they wanted to teach me a lesson, and that that they were trying to get rid of me. So they played it off, it was very like, they definitely tried to play it off like, oh, well, he was hitting on us and, talking about his sex life, which wasn't the case, And to me, that, leads me to think that they were trying to goad me into a fight so that they could take care of me. They assumed that I was gay. I never once, I never once hit on them. I was friendly towards them, in times when I was trying to build morale. And I feel that they use that to say that I was like, hitting on them. Um, which absolutely wasn't the case. When I was in the military and in uniform, I was professional. I carried myself, with the utmost respect for everyone, including myself. And although it's, I have my mannerisms and I have the way I speak, and people make assumptions based on that. I never once said that I was gay, and I never once hit on anybody. Anybody that I was with, and they weren't even that cute. Like, come on, it's always people who look like a foot that think you're hitting on them. Like, okay. Anyway, so that being said, so they admitted to that, basically, that it was a hate crime, but at the time that wasn't protected under the Army's equal opportunity policy, so none of them got in trouble. I was brought back to Baghdad and then promptly given a memo saying that I was being discharged under Don't Ask, Don't Tell for homosexual acts, and that it was they tried to give me an other than honorable discharge. I luckily I was connected with a few lawyers over there. And they helped me put a case together and try to fight it. During this whole process, like, my social media was put on display. There was pictures of me kissing my boyfriend. Like, it was this whole, like, very intrusive thing that people printed out, like, pages from my social media to use as evidence against me. Ultimately, I was discharged. I did receive an honorable discharge, which was super important to me because, again, I joined the Army because I had no resources. I still had no resources, and I needed healthcare. I wanted the GI benefits and things like that. So I fought for the honorable discharge, and I did get it. I think at the time, outwardly, I was very vocal and proud and telling and really just loud about my story because I felt that it was important. So I really leaned into the advocacy part and fighting against these exclusionary policies that were in the military and in our government and everything. I never once said that I was gay. There were people who found my social media and who were supposed to be friends of mine, that found my social media and used that as evidence against me. So it was really like, outwardly I was very, taking on the advocate role, but inside I was struggling. I was not okay. I felt like, everything had been ripped out from underneath me because that was my career plan. Like, I had no other plans aside from being in the military. And then retiring and, everything. So it was, and then on top of that, to be attacked in that way, to have friends come out and speak out against me, in this whole situation, and not know who to trust. It's just, and then on top of that, obviously we're in a war zone, so we're being shot at and we're also having bombs dropped on our heads. So I came back and I was really messed up. I really tried to lean into the whole advocacy thing. And I did take part in a lot of, walks and, marches and projects that, I think helped push for, them repealing that policy. But inside it was just turmoil. I was depressed. I felt like crap about myself. This whole thing paired with, the religious upbringing was like kind of I reverted to questioning myself about, is being gay really okay? Like, all those lessons I learned after coming out, I feel like just it came into question, and I didn't know where to turn. I didn't, have anyone. And all I did, unfortunately, there was a long period of time where I was self-medicating. I became addicted to opiates, um, partying, pain pills, party pills, things like that. Um, and I ended up in the hospital after, my last suicide attempt. That was in 2000 and I want to say 2010. And it took me a long time to get right. I think it was about 7 years later that I finally was connected with a therapist that worked for me, and there was a lot going on in my life that I was like, I'm a toxic person. I'm not okay. I was like, yes, I've been hurt, and there's been so much that I've been through, and I feel, and part of it is me feeling so crappy about myself and not loving who I am, that I've become toxic to the people around me. So I finally started seeing, really pursuing therapy. And it still took me, a while to find a therapist that I worked well with. But I think once I did, that made all the difference. I worked and since then continued to work on my mental and emotional health, and just getting to myself to a point where I love myself again. And I think that's been like, the most important part of the journey is just kind of like learning to love myself again. Um, Unfortunately, so I do carry a lot with me from, these experiences, along with, everything that happened after coming out of the military, and the drugs and partying, and finding out I was positive and everything, and then feeling even othered even more in that situation. Um, I really isolated myself for a long time. And it became difficult for me to connect with people, and then just feel comfortable being myself. Um, I don't think I've ever gone back to the person I was before the army, in terms of just being free and like loving who I was and expressing myself freely, wearing what I want, and that's like one of the most simple things, I think, is um, very, like, one of the most simple examples, I think, is like, I don't wear what I want, like I wear purposely muted clothing. I look like sometimes I look at myself, I'm like, all right, you look real straight. Or like I walked out of a Walmart catalog. um, because it is scary, the times that I've tried, after that experience, and just carrying that violence with me and being afraid of that happening again, on top of, also the way the just climate in this country has gotten, since the last, not even just the last 4 years, or not even the last, 10 years. Even before that, I think we've slowly seen a decline in how we are acting in this country. And it surprises me, because before I was in the army, and before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, I felt like or once Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, I was like, we're on the right track. And then gay marriage came, and then I was like, great. And then I think since then, it's kind of like we were up here and we're starting to like go down a little bit, little by little each day. So it's gotten scary. I think that like the few times that I've gone out wearing clothes that, I guess would identify me as a gay person, or not even a gay person, because clothes don't make you gay, but just something that's outside of the norm for like a hetero person to wear. I've been called a faggot by people driving past in cars, and this isn't Poughkeepsie. This is in New York State. Everybody thinks that New York is a blue state. New York's not a blue state. New York is a red state with very populated blue areas, like the city, Albany, even Poughkeepsie. Like the city of Poughkeepsie tends to be a little bit more, I would say, like, liberal in their stance, but is still very, like, the government is still very Republican controlled and very conservative in a lot of ways. So yeah, I've definitely been, had people yell things at me out of moving cars, and it scares me, because it's like, all right, well, what's to stop them from next time they drive past me throwing a rock, or, which obviously is triggering for me, and then I've gotten a lot of hate, for being vocal about Don't Ask, Don't Tell, after coming out of the Army, I mean, I definitely was part of my self-medication and partying was kind of like in response to being afraid. It was a lot of things, but being afraid was definitely one of them, because being vocal, and as vocal as I was about my story, got me painted a target on my back in the local area. As soon as it happened, I contacted local news outlets. And because the national tell was a very hot topic, I also wanted my story to be something that it was a strategic move, because if people are talking about it, they can't just make me disappear, or they can't just get me lost in the shuffle, which happened to a lot of people, where they would be sitting in Iraq for years waiting to be discharged. And I knew people who were in this position. I was like, I'm not playing that. So being that vocal definitely drew a lot of, people. I've had people, approach me in public and shout things at me and call me dirty and call me this and call me that, because they recognize me from being the Grand Marshal of the Pride Parade around here, or because they saw an article that I was part of, or they messaged me on Facebook telling me that, it was my fault, that I was acting like a freak and I was probably letting my freak flag fly, and, people telling me I deserve to die, and for various reasons. And it's crazy, because I've experienced that hate way back then, and it definitely affected me and how I carry myself. There was a long time where I was super paranoid and I wouldn't leave the house. Like I was thinking, it drove me a little bit crazy. And sometimes, like I said, I do still carry a lot of that with me, and that's why I present myself the way I do, even when I'm going to a drag show or a gay bar, and even more so now, I think, when I'm going to a gay event, or whether it's a drag show, whether it's a picnic, whatever it is, I'm on edge. Because of the political climate in this country, how emboldened people have gotten in this country to be as ignorant. And it's one thing to be ignorant. If you want to be ignorant and you want to state your opinion, that's one thing. But then they're taking it a step further and trying to legislate our lives away, and actively supporting that and being loud and vocal about it. And it's empowering people who would do harm to us to feel that they're in the right to be able to do that. So it's scary, especially after every, pulse, things like that. Like I know we all know people from Orlando, and we all know people who were there. You know what I mean? So that one definitely hit close to home, and just with the way shootings have been in this country, it's like you never know where you could be anywhere. And I think that, I definitely have had a lot of fear because of the political climate in this country. After being threatened and after having people harass me, and even like from our own community, which sometimes is just scary, and that's a whole separate conversation, because that has to do with, my status and being positive and everything. Has isolated me, and I'm now, like, it's hard for me to connect with people even to this day. Like I've become comfortable just kind of like keeping to myself, because it's safer and I don't have to worry when I'm home alone in my apartment, or home with my husband and, our cats and dog in our apartment. Whereas if we go out, like, I'm always worried that somebody's going to harass us for, if I never, hold his hand in public. I never put my arm around him. And I don't really show a lot of PDA, because I'm afraid of what people's responses are going to be. And I'm afraid that that's going to put us in jeopardy, because it has before in my life. Just like, even if we're walking too closely together, it's like people's assumptions are strong enough for them to take action. So I'm very cautious about that. And when we're going in public, I'm always like looking for the exits wherever we are. just to make sure that I know where they are. I'm always like scanning the crowd, looking for somebody, like seeing if there's anybody like that just seems out of sorts, you know what I mean, that might have a gun on them. Um, and that's, like I said, I think that's become because of being attacked in like a violent way, and then combine that with just everything going on in this country where they're trying to legislate our lives away. They're trying to legislate women's rights away. They're trying to just take away everyone's rights who's not straight white male. And it's scary. But I think the solution to hate is love, and number one. And sometimes love is tough love. When I say the solution to hate is love, I don't mean that, I don't believe we should turn the other cheek. If you're going to attack me, I'm going to defend myself. I think the community just really kind of needs to come together, and I think that we need to find ways to bridge the community within itself, because there are a lot of gaps within the community, whether it's a gap of race or serophobia or whatever is causing that. I think we need to educate ourselves and our friends and our chosen families, and letting people know, like, and holding like our friends accountable, like, hey, this is what it is, this is wrong, this is, we need to be understanding of people's stories, and not other ourselves, so that we can stand stronger together. That's a big part of it. And then holding the people who aren't part of that community in our lives also accountable, and educating them, telling our stories, as scary as it is. Like, it's really, I mean, this is super nerve-wracking for me. I'm sorry, I've been like jumping all over the place, but I have ADD and I'm nervous right now, so because I haven't talked about this in years. And it's definitely a hard thing to talk about, but I think especially right now, it's so important that we keep telling these stories, and that we keep showing a presence, showing that we're not afraid. And then also, I think the time for hiding and not having these conversations is somewhat over. I think like there was a long time where it was like, let's just not have the conversation. Let's just live our lives and live and let live. But obviously that's not working, because people on the other side of this are having conversations and formulating their actions based on those conversations. And a lot of those actions are to hurt us or impede our lifestyle or take our rights away. And we need to be just as vocal in telling these stories, and holding those people who are not part of the community in our lives accountable, and finding a way to do it that's like healthy and safe. Because I think that's a big thing that's held me back, is also just in the business that I work in, which is property management and real estate. It's very conservative. It's very difficult to have these conversations, and work isn't always the best place to have these conversations, especially if it's a conservative workplace where you could tend to lose your job. And I think that I've become braver in that, where I've been finding ways to have these conversations and telling people, like, it's okay to believe what you believe. Just let us live our lives, and that's across the board. It's, we have to do that with the people we work with. We have to do that and have these uncomfortable conversations with people that are in our families, our immediate families. And then stopping it when we see it out, as well, like being an ally for other people who are in those situations. I think, like if you see somebody on the street being harassed, don't be afraid to like stand with that person who's being harassed and show them that they're not alone, because then the bully is going to 9 times out of 10 back off. And voting, and legislation and getting involved in that, I think is a huge thing. Like it's not, we can't afford not to vote. We can't afford not to get involved at this point, because they're just, if we don't, it's just going to be what they say goes.
So, I'm from a military town, right? I'm from Columbus, Georgia, which is home to Fort Benning, which is one of the biggest military bases in America, where they do most of the Ranger training and the airborne training. My godfather was a drill sergeant. Shout out to the late, great Herman Askew from Fort Benning. And I was able to so because I also went to college in this town, I saw a lot of gay military personnel. And I went to college after Clinton was elected, and the Clinton administration was the administration that put forth "Don't ask, do not tell." Um, and it's really interesting too how "Don't ask, don't tell" really kind of became insidious in all facets of life. People started using the phrase "Don't ask, don't tell"
Even in pop
um,
culture.
for like things even yeah, it became a pop culture thing where it's like if you don't tell me you're a queer, then I won't. If you don't ask me, if I don't ask you, you can't tell me. Let's just like ignore it. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, it's the Gays in the Military, How America Thanked Me is really, really riveting. And so I urge everybody to check it out. Just Google it and you'll be able to read more about Nate's story and other stories of service members who served and, experienced the now obviously very harmful don't ask, don't tell policy, among many other harmful policies that the Clinton administration implemented. Yeah, so thank you so much, Nate, for sharing your story with us. We really do appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you.
You know,
Um,
I'm really, you know, I spent a lot of time thinking about like activism and advocacy. I don't think that cannot be a surprise. Um, and as I know you do as well, that's part of the reason why we have this podcast and how we can use our platforms to, share ideas, but then also, benefit, you know, people by telling stories that aren't necessarily as widely told. And there's so much intersectionality in, the story of fighting back against oppression, and regard it's applicable everywhere, right? Um, but it's it is it is tough and discouraging as a Black person who is trying to make her way in the world of entertainment because that's my dream. My dream. I really do feel close to being an advocate. I mean, I feel like I do it naturally, but the reason why I do it, I think the reason why I do it naturally is because I'm able to use my experience to speak from the heart about my experience of having being discriminated against or being a part of a marginalized identity and group, more than one. And so that's why I'm connected to advocacy. um but that's not my dream. My dream wasn't to be discriminated against and then talk about it. My dream is to be an actor and to be a performer and to use my talents that I have, right? And I understand that people learn better when they're hearing a story. They absorb an idea that about politics better. People zone out and snooze when you talk about politics, but when you make them laugh or make them cry or touch them in some way with your story, then they get closer to you. They understand your story and the political implications as well. Everybody knows that that's not unique to being Black or queer or anybody. Um, and so that's why I choose to sort of perform art as activism and have some of the stories about being part of the queer community or being my Black experience in everything that I do. And so that's how I choose to perform my activism and my advocacy. And it's really difficult when it's great. The advantage is people can learn from our activism and our advocacy because it's a part of our entertainment. And so when people consume our entertainment, watch our clips, may hopefully buy something, that they're getting some of that authentic story with it, right? But then the thing that is unfortunate is when we are wading into murky territory where speaking out can mean sacrificing, your not only your career but your job, your livelihood, and your ability to pay your rent, um, because you've tied your career, to your likeness, to your voice, to your platform. That's
Mhm.
really, really a very heavy thing to lift. And
Well, it makes it. I would say it makes it really hard when you see people who are even at the very top of their craft being, you know,
deplatformed.
getting consequences for living the truth. When you see Monique speaking out against being offered less money
And
to do
then they're
stand up
like, fine,
comedy than her
less money.
peers
How
who
about
are
no money?
no money. When you see it happening to Eartha Kitt,
Mhm.
Eartha Kitt was blacklisted in Hollywood as well. When you see someone at that level, it happened to Zero Mostel, a famous Jewish actor who was in Fiddle on the Roof, for talking about communism. When you see it happening with different people who are at the top of their craft, and if it could happen to Monique, Oscar award winner Monique, then what's protecting Bob the drag queen? What's protecting, these other the other people in the industry, and then people who aren't in the industry? What's protecting the accountant who works down at some finance place? What's protecting the teacher?
Exactly. And that's the thing that is really interesting. And I remember, I mean, I know I've spoken about this before. I read a wonderful book that I probably want to read again. It's called Transgender History by Susan Stryker. And in that book, she speaks about, um, you know, just in general, I can't quote it, but in general, like people who are um, queer people are oftentimes more politically active because we have the least to lose, or have less to lose in certain regards. And she was basically connecting that to people who do have the least to lose are oftentimes more politically active. That's more close to the quote that she said, which explains why queer people who don't have certain rights are fighting for those rights. When you don't have the rights, you fight for them. um and and so it's no surprise to see certain uh, efforts, certain movements, certain political movements throughout history. A lot of times, even though we don't necessarily know, like I think the story was for the longest time that white gay men fought for their rights at Stonewall. It wasn't until 20 years ago now, but like many years later, that we heard stories of the black queer people and the black trans people who were there and also involved, if not right on the front lines, right? It was the sex workers who were
Yeah.
being targeted. And it was most of the sex workers that were on the street performing sex work because they didn't have the ability to blend in and get jobs at other places. And these are people who didn't have access to maybe their parents' money or some other form of safety or security. And so those are the people who were the sex workers, all different types of people, but a lot of them were people of color, black trans sex workers, who were the first people.
Yeah, folks over at Star
Exactly.
who
Oh
are,
yeah.
on the front line.
Our friends over at Star, right on the front lines. And then, but even before Stonewall, it's not just a coincidence because it happened at the Black Cat Tavern. It happened at Compton's cafeteria before Stonewall, right? And so we know that black queer people, obviously it was queer because these are the queer movements, but the black queer people were on the front lines. These are the people who were being picked on by the police, being targeted, and then the community said, we're going to fight back in all these instances. And in a larger degree, we talk about, the suffrage movement, women fighting for the right to vote, marching. They were marching in the streets. They were picketing. They were, holding up an effigy of the president. And they were, wheeling and dealing both on the inside and outside. They also had that question of like respectability, or do we march in the streets? But one thing that we don't often realize is that, like, we think of the pillars of that movement as the white women that were there, but there were black women there too. Ida B. Wells, and the black women that were there fighting on the front lines for the suffrage movement, for all women to get the right to vote, which happened as a result of that movement. The black women didn't even get to enjoy that right to vote until many, many years later because of discrimination and racism. And so we're often seeing that
Yeah.
the people who are often on the front lines of these things were the ERA. We talk, there's so many Black women that are right there in the front lines of the ERA who don't necessarily reap the benefits and the instant payoff that may come. And the ERA didn't pass, but people fighting for rights in general are not often the first ones to be able to use those rights. And a lot of times, if they're on the front lines, they're the first people to be sacrificed, or they're the first people to be seen, and then have their platforms, their jobs get fired from their thing, be ostracized from the community. And the first people to be ostracized for the community with the message are usually never brought back into the fold. You know what I mean? They're usually in. And so,
Yeah.
and a lot of times those are the Black people who don't really have, they were the newest to the table, the last person to get hired, the person who earns the least amount of money, and they don't end up gaining this type of job security that their white counterparts in the same positions have. We already know that they're not getting paid the same amount of money, and they definitely didn't get grandfathered in. There's no, there's not a lot of nepotism happening. There's not a lot of, sort of security that they have, like generational, and so if they're there, it's contrary to popular belief, you know, what's it called?
What?
DE&I is a talking point, but it only existed because
Wait, D and I.
DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Oh, DEI. I was like D and I. What is? I was
DE
like,
and
I'm missing my
um,
acronyms.
are not.
There we go.
They're a really big talking point right now to be demonized, again, with CRT and every other thing, wokeness and everything that's Black, basically, that they're demonizing. It's not something that it is something that a lot of people announce, a lot of corporate, agencies and people announced that they were going to implement in different ways, just industrially and commercially and all over the place after 2020, during 2020. But if you go back and do the research, a lot of these corporations, they didn't actually implement these. They did hire DEI specialists and then fired them the next year. We experienced something with a platform that was with our platform, Black Queer Town Hall, and which was wildly successful. We were very much courted by all of the channels and networks and platforms
Oh yeah.
in 2020. And then we were clutching our pearls at how quickly they pulled a Bud Light in 2021, the next year. And so it just goes to show you that, what it looks like you, just because you see a Black person that's visible, who's maybe a celebrity, who's maybe on TV, it's chances are, if they are in the United States, they do not have as much job security and the ability to withstand public blowback for speaking truth to power in the same way that their white counterparts who are not speaking truth to power, in many instances, and many are, the blowback that they receive, and then being able to bounce back. The bounce back just doesn't hit the same.
Well, it makes sense to me that the people who have the most to lose, who have more to lose, they tend to not want to speak up. The people who have nothing to lose, people who have less to lose, they're like, well, what do I have to
Yeah.
lose now? You know what I mean? And if you feel like that's why the most marginalized use the ones who are like, well, I have nothing to lose, so I'm just going to go ahead and speak out and advocate because I've lost it all anyway. So what am I sitting here fighting for? You know? So that makes a lot of sense to me, why you see women and people of color, and trans people, queer people are always at the very front line because they've already lost what they had and now they're just trying to get something back. And I've always said this before. I think one of the biggest problems with the wealth distribution and the resources distribution in America is that the resources are limited. So in order for the people at the bottom to have something, the people at the top are going to have to give something up. That's because there's only a certain number of houses, there's only a certain number of money, there's only a certain number of jobs. So there is enough for everyone, but the people at the top are going to have to let go of something so the people at the bottom can have something. And that is not, I don't think that people at the top are willing and ready to do that.
So with this, I do think with the goal of equality and realizing the a common goal where we sh- I believe we all want to get to. I hope that we do, or at least those of us who are not in elected office um, want to get to. Uh, you know, I understand that, especially on social media, it's really important for people to see the people they look up to, the people that they admire, speaking out. Um, I know that's essential and really important, but let's figure out ways that we can, across the board, not just depend only on social media as a way to implement change. There are so many important ways, and it seems like it has to happen sort of all at once. People behind the scenes, people in front of the scenes, people on social media, people out in the street, people in the halls at the same time, almost in a coordinated way. Um, and if and so I don't really know exactly what I'm saying, but I know that we're going into what will probably be a very volatile political season, and then
Woof.
afterwards a a moment of great change or potentially fear or revolution, or I don't know what it's going to be, but I know it's going to take all of us and rallying behind and around people, the people that you may just think, oh, they got it, they're strong, they'll say what I want them to say, and then I'll just let them be alone. Solidarity is important, and we have to have it both online, in front of the scenes, behind the scenes, and all over the place. And so
Mhm.
let's buckle up.
Let's buckle up, honey. All right. Thank you all for listening to us today. I know we got it pretty hefty there at the end. But we want to do a special thanks to our executive producer, Tracy Marquez, senior producer, Charlene Westbrook, producer, Corey Nixon, and post producer, Amelia Ritaler. And our music is by the incredibly talented Lathan Bear. We'll see you all very soon.